Hello, everybody. This is the podcast number 5 of the COTRI Talks series. Thank you for joining us again. My name is Professor Dr. Wolfgang Georg Alt. I'm the CEO of COTRI, China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. And today we have a little update on the development of Chinese outbound tourism in hopefully soon to come post-pandemic times and the new trends we can all expect and should prepare for. Let's have a short overview about the new trends and expectations in the post-pandemic Chinese outbound tourism. Clearly, the world is preparing for the restart of China's outbound tourism. The appetite for international travel in China has not changed. Surveys show that the Chinese international travelers are as eagerly as everybody awaiting the time when it will become possible again to start postponed and new trips for business, family meetings, health, education, and of course, leisure. The appetite has not changed, but travel behavior, needs, and expectations have changed during the pandemic. More importance is given to nature-based activities, to visiting new and less crowded destinations, to go for meaningful activities. Travel forms are moving from mass market package tours towards FIT or semi-organized trips in small groups. So let's look in more detail at this. Very briefly, I traveled to China for the first time in 1978. I've been a tour operator. I've been for many years a professor for international tourism management, and as you can see, I also engaged in a number of other organizations. The last one added in 2021 being that I'm the founding dean of the HET Business School Institute. The China Outbound Tourism Research Institute, as the name is already suggesting, is working to help people all around the world to make Chinese visitors happy and to earn some money in a sustainable way in the process. And also COTRI is a member of a number of the major international tourist organizations in the world. So I'm sure you're all aware that outbound tourism from China has been growing significantly in the last 15 years, and China became the top tourism source market. But also that China in 2020, 2021 has recovered faster than all other G20 countries. The economy is back on track. And the top 10% of the Chinese society, those traveling abroad, rather got richer than poorer in that period. And also domestic tourism in China is back to normal, in some parts even already more developed than the 2019 numbers were indicating. So we will try to look at this development and see how the Chinese outbound tourism actually offers to the possibility to develop a more sustainable approach and a way towards what we call meaningful tourism through the improvement of quality and with the support of recommendation marketing. Because as Taleb Rifai, the Secretary General of WTFI, World Tourism Forum Institute, to which HAT BSI also belongs, and of course the former Secretary General of UNWTO has been saying, and we just heard him before talking about this, no return to the old normal, but forward to a new, better normal. Because the challenge for global tourism has been that by 2019, the good old times, people remember now fondly, actually were not so good. So we had over-tourism, we had host communities increasingly being hostile towards visitors. And we simply saw that by the very success of international tourism, by the immense growth of numbers of tourists, the idea of hospitality has been made a mockery, and in many places a juggernaut have been driving over local nature, local culture, local authenticity, diversity, serendipity, negatively impacting satisfaction levels of all stakeholders involved. So you're probably are familiar with this graph. So border crossing from mainland China, you can see starting from something like 10 million in at the beginning of the new millennium, moving up to 170 million in 2019, and as our forecast is by 2022, reaching the level of 2019 fully, or maybe almost fully again. And the other story you can see in this graph is how the Greater China, so Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, was very important in the beginning, and most of the trips, the majority of the trips actually only went to Greater China, what is the blue part in the graph, but the orange one, the rest of the world, has been growing more and more, especially since 2014-15. So now more than half of the trips are going beyond Greater China. And also from the total number that already 2019 Chinese outbound tourism was, both in terms of trips and also in terms of spending, more than double if you take the size of USA and Germany together. So we saw by 2019 that the Chinese outbound tourists had already a higher level of sophistication. Then they had more special trips becoming of central interest for them. We saw that more young travelers below 18 and more older senior travelers were joining international tourism. And also it was not exclusively anymore first-tier city inhabitants traveling internationally. And of course, there was much more information available about outbound destinations, where to go, what to do. And even the problem of language was overcome, that you have a lot of gadgets, and already had them in 2019, where you have an app or you have a little machine where you can speak in your language and the machine will speak in a selected other language. But what we could also see is that, again, like in global tourism, also for Chinese outbound tourism, that the very success of the market led to the case that the quality and the satisfaction was actually going down. And so there were only quantitative KPIs were used. So arrival numbers were growing, hooray. But you could see that in most places you had rather low yield because it was all the question of pushing down the prices. And also that in some places, even the big numbers of Chinese visitors were pushing the traditional markets out of the destination, so that other Australians, Europeans, and so on were feeling overwhelmed by the number of Chinese visitors and stopped traveling there. Bali maybe is an example of that. So, and in many cases, Chinese tourists, because they were so visible, were blamed for being the source of over-tourism. So what we also saw that, of course, the development from mass market package tours going very quickly from staying one night in one country and the next night in another country, towards slowing down. And this has to do a lot with the fact that the fastest growing segment of the market already in 2019 was the best agers, or the silver travelers, which means mostly persons between 55 and 65 or maybe 70 years old. There are some recent numbers from the census, which was published a few months ago. So we can see that the number of Chinese people aged 60 and above are now about 20% of the population. And if you also keep in mind that women in China can already retire when they're 55, so it's actually almost a quarter of the population already pensioners. So many of them, obviously not all of them, but many of them have sufficient money and newly time to spend to go on longer trips. And most of them have more interest in local culture, in meeting local people and also in activities like fine dining. And if you look on the graph, obviously you can see that this is just the beginning of a further increase of the importance of 65 plus, and certainly below that 55 to 65-year-old persons in China. Saying that, of course, we also have to think about the fact that we have the Ling hosts, people born after the year 2000, now also entering the travel market and joining mostly the previous generations of independent outbound travelers. So during the pandemic until now, almost the only Chinese international travelers were those who were already living abroad and had the possibility to visit neighboring countries. Saying that Macau has been open for Chinese tourists since last autumn, and they saw millions of arrivals, but this is the only exception. For all other places, Chinese have to go into quarantine for several weeks after returning, if they are allowed into the other country in the first place, and if there is a connectivity existing. So you can see here the example of Germany and Chinese arrivals starting from March 2020 to April this year. And you can see that, for instance, in September last year, there were almost 14,000 Chinese crossing the border into Germany. And obviously they did not come from China, but they were coming from other parts of the Schengen area, so they could enter the Germany without any problems in terms of visa. And so these are students or also expatriates working for Bank of China, or Costco, or other companies in that case mostly the Schengen area. So what will happen after the pandemic? So we can see that many of the changes we discussed before have been accelerated. The pandemic has been a booster for many things which happened already before, and we can be certain that we will see more independent travel and less mass market travel. Of course, it's not black and white. There will still be mass market package tours, but the importance will decrease even further. We will see a lot more self-drive and RV trips where the Chinese, like they do in domestic tourism now, bring their own shell with them so they can control their environment in their own car or their own recreational vehicle, of course, much better. We will certainly see more striving for exclusivity, which can either mean luxury hotels or staying and doing luxury activities, but also themed tours, so where you have people following their special interests and doing something exclusive in the way that they are concentrating on a specific topic. We will see more adventure tourism, so connected to nature tourism, so that you try out things out in the open, and so there will be a lot of these things happening, and of course different Chinese market segments will rather adhere to different parts of this activities. So business, family, and education will be probably the motivations for the first Chinese outbound post-COVID-19 travelers, and followed then later on by leisure travelers. So it was a common knowledge until recently that, of course, they will travel first to Greater China and the neighboring countries. But looking at the current COVID-19 numbers, it might actually be that they are traveling earlier to Europe than to their neighbors, where there is still a lot of COVID-19 activity happening. So the big question, when will the borders open in China? And there are three preconditions for that. First, the permission to leave China and to enter the destination without a quarantine on the way out or on the way back in. That has to be there. Connectivity with enough affordable air connections and most importantly, I'm sure the trust of the Chinese outbound travelers in the safety and the hygiene of the destination. So the Chinese government has been very careful in bringing down the number of COVID-19 cases in China. Actually, since January 31st, 2021, so half a year ago, nobody in China has died because of COVID-19. And also the majority of Chinese citizens is already vaccinated as we are speaking. And we can see that as a right to start private companies, to own a private car, and also to have the opportunity to travel abroad has been enjoyed by the upper middle class in China in the last decades. And that also there's a need for business and educational international exchanges. The borders will open again. If that will be for the October Golden Week or for only next year's Chinese New Year, we will see. But it was interesting to see that recently there was a Greece-China Culture and Tourism Year agreement signed on the top level between the Greek Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping. And this will begin in September 2021, so next month, and is explicitly supporting tourism in both directions. So maybe that is a positive sign. What do we have to do to prepare for the wave of Chinese outbound tourists after the pandemic? So certainly there is a need to focus more than before on quality instead of just quantity, and to concentrate more on satisfaction than just on arrival numbers, which also will require that you add qualitative value-based KPIs to the existing quantitative KPIs. So this quantitative KPIs can be levels of sustainability, responsibility, and, as we discussed before, meaningfulness, and certainly the question of the satisfaction levels of both the customers, the hosts, the staff, the company, and the earnings, and also the question how much is the environment taken care of and degradation is limited. And so we can see that what happened in the last years before the pandemic was that we all have heard about the four P of marketing, that only one of them, namely promotion, was used, whereas there are also three others. There's also price, place, and product. And as the most NTOs and many companies and hotel groups and airlines concentrated on promoting their products in Chinese social media, telling the potential visitors how wonderful it is, with very little actually results. So they have been, in many cases, been forgotten that product and product adaptation is a key point, which led to the Chinese tour operators concentrating on price. If the product was more or less the same everywhere or was not specifically adapted for Chinese tourists, then the competition would be on who is cheaper. So growth without adaptation created the need already before COVID-19. And so the fact that we all had to step back and had the time, if we like it or not, to think about how can we be more successful in our encounters with the Chinese market, so that this is something the pandemic has given us some time to think about this and to hopefully come out of this with a stronger concentration on quality, satisfaction, recommendations as a key marketing tool, and better yield. So by that, you can destinations and service providers can attract Chinese outbound travelers to stay longer, to spend more, and to give recommendations to their peers. So it is basically the good old word of mouth, which of course now is also the word of mouse. That's why we call this warm square, and the use of user-generated content. So in China, most people have understood that KOLs, key opinion leaders, are just paid for what they're saying nicely about the place. So working with KOCs key opinion customers who are really trusted by their peers if they do a live stream or a post telling people how wonderful it is here or how nice are the people working in this hotel and so on. This is much more convincing. So we will see still Chinese people wanting to see the world with their own eyes, to gain social prestige from their travel, to follow their serious leisure interest, and maybe also follow in the footsteps of their idols and of celebrities. But on top of this, there will be more, as we said, interest in nature, including also health. And also there is a growing trend to travel with your family members or your friends and to go to places which are new to Chinese tourists and where there are not so many other Chinese tourists yet, which offers some big opportunities for smaller destinations and overcoming the language barrier. So it's clearly a growing interest, not just to take a photo, but really to get in contact with the local culture in an authentic and sustainable way. So we see that meaningful tourism is the new normal of post-pandemic tourism if we get it right. So which is for the tourists that they can gain new experiences and increase their knowledge about others, but also about themselves. For the host communities to have more influence on the tourism development and to get more benefit from visitors. For the staff, something which is often overlooked, of tourism and hospitality service providers to be offered full-time careers, so 12 months employment, because Chinese tourists can be more easily than other markets put into the shoulder season and low season times by offering well-adapted products, so that also the staff is more happy in what they're doing. And for governments to gain this full-time employment opportunities for the citizens and also having an increased tax income. And last but not least, for the environment, through the engagement of for all the stakeholders to be careful and more interested, for everybody feeling more connected to a place, the effect that there is no or at least less damage done locally, and that maybe there is a growing push for non-polluting forms of mobility also on a global level. How to bring this new normal into reality? Well, there's a program which is called Advantage Tourism, which is offering all the tools and all the knowledge needed for that, and so which has the goal of providing customized quality for Chinese visitors. So with this, let me end my little introduction and just pointing out that there is a free publication called the COTRI Weekly. You can subscribe to if you have interest in a deeper knowledge. I would recommend our China tourism training we are offering together with the Hong Kong Polytech University School of Hotel and Tourism Management in Hong Kong, SAR, and as I mentioned, Advantage Tourism for companies, for destinations, as a program which certainly will bring you into a successful future. So this is the end of today's podcast. Thank you very much for following it, and please feel free to subscribe to our COTRI Talks podcasts and listen to all our different editions. And I wish all of you a successful and healthy day.